Uriah went to his death unaware of how David had betrayed him. Jesus approached death fully aware of our betrayal, and yet he went to the cross eagerly anyway. Jesus died willingly to pay for all the sins you had committed against him and all the ways you had betrayed him. Jesus is the righteous king that you were looking for. David was disengaged from the battle. He put himself in a place to be tempted. He objectified her. Next, David abused his power. David was able to make all this happen because David was the king. Again, verse 4 says he took her. Now, some have raised the question of whether that means David raped her and that he gave her no choice in the matter. That is a valid question. How consensual was Bathsheba in all of this? It doesn't say. On the one hand, there are Hebrew words for rape, and they are not used in this passage, nor is this story presented like the rape that takes place in chapter 13, where Amnon, David's son, forces himself on Tamar, his half-sister. But it is true, David was the king, and he had the power. And if the king demanded something, she probably felt powerless to resist him. I can only imagine what she was feeling when those messengers of David suddenly showed up at her door. In fact, the parable that the prophet Nathan uses in the next chapter to confront David about this sin presents David as a greedy thief who steals a helpless lamb from his neighbor's flock. What we can say for certain is that David's sin here involves an egregious abuse of power, because regardless of whether or not she was complicit at all, David used his position to take what did not belong to him from those who were essentially powerless to resist him. Now, y'all, I don't have to tell you that we live in a society where we constantly hear stories of people who leverage their positions of power to exploit others. God's people were supposed to be different. We were supposed to use our power to protect and to serve, never to exploit and abuse. By the way, some of you have been on the other side of this. Somebody objectified you and didn't take into account what their sin was going to do to you or your family. Some woman or some man selfishly used your spouse or your child with no thought of the destructive tsunami waves it would send to your family. Or maybe it was you yourself that got used. Maybe it even happened against your will. Somebody exploited their power over you to abuse you. This chapter shows you there is a God who sees. And the thing displeased him, and he will execute justice on your behalf. I want you to know that we have women's directors and pastoral teams that want to walk with you in your hurt through that, if that applies to you. One more thing to notice here before I go on to that second question. I want you to notice that sexual sin destroys lives, absolutely destroys lives. David's sin destroyed Uriah and Bathsheba's home. We're never told about the personal trauma that it caused to Bathsheba. It says that when Uriah died, she mourned, and I wonder how much is hidden in that one word. But we do know for sure that it led to the murder of several innocent men and the death of a child. Chapter 11 marks a turning point in David's own life, you see. From this point on, David's family, his life, and his kingdom start to unravel. In the next chapter, the prophet Nathan is going to prophesy that because of this, the sword will never depart from David's house. In the chapter after that one, 2 Samuel 13, one of David's sons is going to rape his half-sister, and then he's going to be murdered by her older brother. And then a couple of chapters after that, Absalom, who is David's oldest son, is going to lead a rebellion against him, and he's going to take half the kingdom, and he's going to sleep with a lot of his dad's wives, and then is himself murdered. This is an important lesson even for those whose sexual sin may not be in the same category as David's. Our sin affects everybody around us. I read a book one time where a guy listed out all the things that would happen if he committed adultery. And it made me make my own list. It was so impacting to me. I just pulled out a notebook and I jotted my own list. I wrote down, if I had an affair, I would cause untold hurt to Veronica, my wife, and I would have to endure the loss of her respect and trust and might forever forfeit my relationship to her. I would cause deep hurt and confusion in Karis, Ali, Raya, and Adden, who may never understand why I traded a close relationship with them for a cheap thrill. Yeah, I would likely stay involved in their lives, but my relationship with them would never quite be the same. I would bring shame on my mother and father. I would bring endless judgment on the woman I committed adultery with. Her life would be forever labeled by this encounter. If she had kids, I would be the biggest stumbling block for them ever learning to trust in Jesus. I would confuse and discourage many in their walk of faith. I would cause shame to you, my church family. I would give easy fodder to all those who are searching for reasons to mock Christianity and say that it is phony and untrue. I would follow in the footsteps of men I know whose immorality forfeited their ministries and stained the name of their churches, men that you have heard of. Most importantly, I would grieve my Lord and Savior, and one day I would have to look him in the face and explain to him why, after all that he had given to me, after all the blessing and all the beauty that he had put into my life, why I had to have something else. Listen, I'm not trying to drive some of you who have committed sexual sin into despair. But I want to be clear. Okay, listen. There is forgiveness for sexual sin. We're going to see this next week. David is not only going to be forgiven, God is going to create beauty even from these tragic ashes. Jesus is still going to choose to go by the name Son of David. David's Psalms are not taken out of the Bible. We still use them as the basis for our worship songs today. Most of Jesus's quotations in the New Testament come from the Psalms that David wrote. In other words, despite this heinous sin, God did not cancel David. God still had plans to bless David and to use him for good after this sin. That's just the kind of God we serve, y'all. And I know so many stories, beautiful stories right here in our own church, beautiful stories of grace and redemption after sexual sin. But see, I also need you to see that even with forgiveness, this kind of sin is devastating. Both for the person you sin with or against and all of his or her relationships. It's like we often say here at the Summit Church, you can always get forgiveness from sin, but you can't unsin. Meaning your sin, even after forgiveness, leaves waves of destruction that can take a lifetime or even several generations to deal with. So I'm just saying, if you're on the brink of sin, flee. If you're in the middle of sexual sin, confess it now. One of David's problems is that each cover-up attempt makes it harder and more impossible to confess. It's like he became trapped in this web of lies he had spun. Confession is always painful and humiliating, always. But the longer you wait, the more trapped you feel, and the more devastating the consequences become. Stop trying to lie your way out of this. Confess right now and put your hope in Christ right now, and let him start the healing process today. Don't multiply sin with more sin. And listen, I know this has been difficult, especially for some of you, but let's turn now to the most important part of this message, okay? Number 2, our longing for a righteous king. Like I said, I know this has been hard for us to just sit through, but put yourself for a moment, would you? Put yourself in the shoes of Israel. David was their long anticipated and hoped for king, and he'd started out so well, hadn't he? Defeating Goliath, those bold demonstrations of selflessness and faith, and those beautiful Psalms he wrote about God. And now at the end of this chapter, Israel asks through broken hearts and through tears, if even King David, the man after God's own heart, if even he failed us, what hope is there? And when you ask that question, you are finally reading the Bible the right way. See, this story makes clear what we've seen hinted at in David's life all along. You need a king far greater than David. You need a king more faithful, a king who will always act with integrity and will not abuse or exploit you. Listen, every earthly thing you put your hope in is going to disappoint. Every human institution, every leader, every person. Maybe the one bright spot right now in our dismal political dumpster fire that is CNN and Fox News is that some of us are finally realizing that salvation is not going to be found on the other side of the political aisle. It's not on our side or that side. The problem is not the Republicans. The problem is not the Democrats. And I'm not saying that there are no good leaders out there or that they are all equally bad. I'm just saying that maybe some of us are finally learning that our salvation doesn't come from a donkey or an elephant. It comes from a lamb. We long for a different king, don't we? A king greater than David, And this is the beautiful part of this story. That other king that we long for is strangely prefigured in this story, not by David, but by Uriah. Think about Uriah for a minute. Uriah was innocent and selfless. Uriah was loyal to David to the very end. Uriah could not even bring himself to enjoy a night of legitimate pleasure when his countrymen were in harm's way. And when Uriah was placed on the front lines of the fiercest part of the battle and told to charge into the face of death, Uriah did so without hesitating or complaining. In the end, Uriah died, but not because of his sin, he died because of David's. Now, who does that all remind you of? Jesus was the true mighty man, loyal to the end, who refused to partake of pleasure when we were in harm's way, and then he rushed into battle on our behalf, even when it was certain that he would die. In the end, Jesus died like Uriah, not for his sins, but for ours. Uriah beautifully gives us a picture of the steadfast love of God that God had promised to David just a few chapters before this. A love that would never depart from him. Yes, David sinned grievously, and yes, there would be devastating consequences from it, but the steadfast love of God would never depart from the house of David. And God would ultimately die for David's sin, just like Uriah did. And yet, there is one crucial difference between Uriah and Jesus. Uriah went to his death unaware of how David had betrayed him. Jesus approached death fully aware of our betrayal, and yet he went to the cross eagerly anyway. Jesus died willingly to pay for all the sins you had committed against him and all the ways you had betrayed him. Jesus is the righteous king that you were looking for. Which leads me to the last thing that ties all of this together. The way we overcome sin is by being captivated by the beauty of the true king. I said at the beginning, but all of us to different degrees find ourselves in positions where we got the power to exploit somebody else. Maybe not like this, maybe not even sexually, but in some way, we're in a position of power. And many of us, even those of us who have experienced injustice at the hands of others, will turn around and do that to somebody else when we're given the chance. It's like the great irony of human history. Hurt people hurt people. Y'all think about it. Early in David's life, he'd been the victim. Now he's the victimizer. How can we escape this incredible propensity toward exploitation? The answer? By seeing Jesus as the king who laid down his power and privilege for us. You see, David felt driven to possess Bathsheba because his soul was bored and hungry. It's when your soul and your heart is empty that you crave sinful pleasures and you become willing to do whatever it takes to get them. The only way to escape those temptations is to fill up your soul with the love of the king. You see, a lot of people are going about trying to conquer their lust the wrong way. They try to strengthen their own self-control, or they try to eliminate the temptations altogether. I'm just gonna tell you, that ain't never gonna work. The Puritan Thomas Chalmers explained that you can only bring certain desires in your heart under control by replacing them with a stronger desire. Think of an athlete who brings incredible discipline to his or her body because of their desire to win. It's not even that they're spiritual or they're Christians, but they can push their body to the limits. They can say no to all kinds of pleasures because they've got a stronger desire inside them to win. Those lesser desires, the desires to eat bad for you foods or sleep late or watch TV all the time, those are all brought under discipline by a stronger desire. Chalmers said, but your passion for God's got to become like that, where you desire God and his will so much that it brings all lesser desires under control. Thomas Chalmers called this the expulsive power of a new affection. Our problem, he said, is not that our cravings for sex are too strong. He said, no, your problem is that your passion for God is so weak. What you need is not diminished attractions to sin. What you need are stronger affections for God. How do you develop those, you ask? How do you develop those? How do you develop those stronger passions for God? Is it by memorizing the right verses? Is that it? Singing songs? Being in church all the time? Is it through your resolution, your will? Is it praying the right prayers and a magic prayer? Is it getting, touched, on the head at the front of the church? Is that how? No. None of those things. You cannot just tell yourself, develop a consuming passion for God. Those passions come only from beholding Christ, Christ, the truer and better David, Christ, the true king who served not himself but you, Christ who sacrificed himself for you instead of sacrificing you for him. See, when you see through the eyes of the Spirit that he is the king you've always yearned for, then his beauty captivates your heart to the point that you gain the power to say no to sin. That's why the Apostle John says, behold, look. Behold what manner of love the Father has bestowed on us. Look at it, then look at it again, and then look at it till you can't look away, that you ought to be called the children of God. That's the kind of love God gave for you, and so we are. And we know that when he appears, we're gonna be like him because we will see him as he is. And see, everybody who thus hopes in him, everybody who has this hope purifies himself, just like he's pure. Question, are you paying attention? What motivates us to purify ourselves? What motivates you to purify yourself? What's John say? A desire to see him and be like him. Friend, do you get it? That's the gospel invitation. Come behold. Come behold. The gospel is not go and become. The gospel is come and behold. And you gotta have spiritual eyes to see this, so you gotta ask God, you gotta beg God to give him those eyes to you. Turn your eyes upon Jesus, look full in his wonderful face, and then the things of earth grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. But that takes spiritual eyes to see. I mentioned at the beginning the revivals around our country. You know, revival, I don't know, there's a lot of like, what is it? You know, it sounds weird. It's just people being given spiritual eyes to see the beauty of Christ. That's literally all that it is. That's what we need, church, and that's where this passage leaves us. So see, I want us to ask God for that today. We're gonna turn our campuses, all of them, into houses, into tabernacles of prayer. A house of prayer for all nations. And here's what I want you asking God. I want you to ask him to open your eyes to this beauty. I want you to ask him to open the eyes of your family to this beauty. Before we do that, let me make some very specific applications, okay? I want everybody, if you would, to stand to your feet all over at all of our campuses. I'm gonna ask right now that our campus teams come, and they're gonna begin to take their places. Pastors and prayer team leaders, women's directors at all campuses, they're gonna come right down here. I want you to listen very closely. I'm gonna talk very specifically to a handful of you in different categories. There are some of you listening to me right now who have committed sexual sin. I want you to know that there is forgiveness, full and free, but you have to confess it. And I'm gonna invite you to come to these altars and confess it before God. Stop trying to lie your way out of it. You're just making it infinitely worse. When you confess, yes, there are probably gonna be things that you gotta do. My friend, I got good news. God has not canceled you. He never will. He still has plans to use you for good, but those plans start with confession. Let me talk to another group, okay? Here's the second group. We got a lot of middle school and high school and college students and unmarried. We get a group of singles, young professionals. I want to challenge you to commit today to submit your sex life to God. And say, God, I'm gonna do it your way with your help. I want you to grab a friend. I want you to come down and pledge that to God and ask him for his help. Of course, you can sit right there in your seat and do it. I understand that. I'm just telling you, it'll be better if you come and pray around the front. There's something symbolic and significant about doing that in front of the altar. Maybe you've been victimized. Maybe like Uriah and Bathsheba, somebody used you and discarded you. I want you to know that there is healing in Jesus for you. The cross not only offers forgiveness for sinners, the cross also promises healing for sufferers too. God saw it and it displeased him, and he will bring justice. And in the meantime, you can find healing in the love of the King who voluntarily laid down his life for you. Maybe you need to come forward and pray through that and start that healing process. Maybe talk to somebody if that would be helpful. If not, you can just pray open. We're just gonna open the altar at all of our campuses. Our campus pastors, prayer teams are up here to talk and pray with you if helpful. Maybe you just wanna come and pray on your own. People have been doing that in every service. The most incredible things have been happening. You say, well, yeah, JD, can I do all this from my seat? Yes, you can. You can. But there is something significant and symbolic about coming up here and taking this before the Lord. It will change you. Maybe you need to pray for somebody else. Maybe it's not you. Maybe it's a child. Maybe it's your college-age son or daughter. Maybe it's a friend. Maybe it's a roommate. Parents, maybe you need to come and pray for your kids to make these kind of decisions to honor God with their sexuality. That's what Veronica and I will be doing. I just want to invite you to come up here and pray. Maybe you need to receive Christ. And you know you've sinned, maybe not with this one specifically, but you know you've sinned and you're just not sure though you've ever received Jesus' forgiveness and salvation. I want you just to come down and take the hand of one of the people standing down front here and just tell them that. That's why all these people are up here. It's why these altars are open. Maybe you just want to ask God to open your eyes and the eyes of our church to better see the glory of Christ so that you're not so enticed by sin. A lot of us ought to be doing that.
Maybe you've prayed the sinner's prayer before, but you've never really surrendered to God. Maybe you're still living for your own pleasure. You might even be wondering whether or not you're actually saved. Pastor J.D. Greer addresses those questions and doubts in his book titled, Stop Asking Jesus Into Your Heart. If you've ever wrestled with doubts about your status with God, then you need to read this book. We'll send you a copy today when you donate to support this ministry. Give us a call at 866-335-5220. That's 866-335-5220. Or go to jdgreer.com to request your copy today.